full of wisdom and facts. I'm sure you have questions. Let me remind you, we want to discuss both presentations. Please go ahead.
I just want to make an observation, not a question as much, that if we were planning this just for the United States, Jeff, you wouldn't suggest the FCC run an ISP. And the same way, the ITU is a very important organization, but they are the regulators, and whatever we do needs to be regulated. Hence, they are automatically separated. It's not that we're snubbing them or taking it. I think it's quite important that we realize they are conflicted in their role.
I think I probably misunderstood your proposal also. I was referring to a much more limited thing, which is that if there's a designated human right for connectivity, not a specific technology for it, but a designated human right, that could be housed someplace where the agency has responsibility for overseeing that, and that's where I was thinking of the ITU. If the idea is the low Earth orbital satellites or a specific system or technology, then that's quite a different matter. So maybe I misunderstood your recommendation on that.
Okay. Further questions or comments, please? Not just questions. Please, Torero.
Only one comment. I see the connectivity as a necessary condition, for sure. That you need to be in place. But on the other hand, I see content to be crucial here. So I can have an amazing connectivity as a human right, but if I don't have the proper content, then people won't use that connectivity. And that has happened all around. Agriculture is one of the cases where it has happened with the messaging systems. So for me, the idea of the World Connectivity Organization has to be hosted in a place where we can try to catalyze also the content into the connectivity issue. And that's where I was thinking that in certain way, having an agency like the World Bank, for example, or another multilateral, could host with an independent trust fund that could have a council in which ITU could be part of it as an agency to regulate the standards. And will allow also to take advantage of the AAA capacity of the bank to raise more funds and to implement that type of trust fund that you need to scale up this activity.
Well, thank you. If there are no further comments at this stage, I'm sure there was, Ms. Termini, you had your hand up in an earlier session. Would you like to come back? We can now have a cross-cutting discussion, including what we heard from Romano Prodi and Nicolas Negroponte. Just a couple of points before we break for coffee. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. First of all, I apologize for being just a few minutes later, but I'm just coming from St. Petersburg, and that was what I could do now. But, well, I appreciated a lot the fantastic presentations before. And I can see now two different, words. One is the one of human right and the tool to get individual freedom. And the other one is illustrated by Jeffrey Sachs on the development of economies, more industrialized economies. So I appreciated on Mr. Negroponte the attention to global public sector institutions. The only thing I don't understand very well is that for the kind of freedom we are looking for, I think technical innovation is crucial, of course. And innovation is driven by both public sector and private sector. So I cannot see the contrast between the two. Private sector must be regulated, of course, as we know. But, Schumpeter remember us that you also need private industries in order to promote innovation. And that was my question on your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I think that nobody doubts that the connectivity is very, very important for everybody. But since it's how to go from zero connectivity or to go to the 3 billion people that are left and more the 1.5 billion people, I think that we should go by a stage. Was mentioned that the more treasure that any country has are the kids. Therefore, what could be great idea from this audience is to have, for example, the right to every kid have connectivity. And say a school without connectivity is not a school. Then therefore, stage one, because if we cover everything at once, will be more difficult. Second is the secondary school, and later on will be the older or elder people, then we can cover the whole scene. But to go or to jump from today that is not a human right, to be a human right for everybody, will be more difficult to achieve. That instead going step by step and starting with the kids. And I think that Nicolas Negroponte ideas is brilliant in the case that he developed what is called the one laptop per child concept. And having that computer, then you have the connectivity. And having that connectivity that is in the schools, you cover the majority. Then if we go and have a vision to have every single kids in the world with connectivity, you achieve a lot of that 1.5 billion that is left.
Excellent. Please, Mr. Becher.
Good morning. What's difficult for me to understand is why we're making so much difference between things. I mean, no one discusses that electricity is a civil right. No one discusses that water is a civil right. Why are we discussing that internet is a civil right? Because in different aspects, 100 years ago, the utilities of the public utilities at that stage decided that the countries had to have water and electricity, and it was a mission. We are living in the middle of that stage for connectivity. It's a necessary condition, not sufficient, right? So we can discuss the necessary condition, and then we have to discuss all the other issues that have to do with what implies to have. The same thing for other things. So if we are in a stage in the world that many things are considered that have to be ubiquitous for all the world, why is it there is some reluctancy about connectivity, right? My impression is that there is a big push between the private telecom companies and the governments and the money that that we raise or that the governments raise through auctions and all that. But it seems to be very simple when you go out of that world and you say, in the 21st century, is there any chance for a remote society to move up without connectivity? Yes or no? If it's no, we have to solve the problem.
Okay. Can I answer that? Yeah, please.
There's a very big difference between electricity and water, and the reason this is coming up now is electricity and water have to be delivered. Even electricity is physical, you've got to get wires there. So it is, by definition, a slightly different problem. What we're talking about is closer to an idea. It's closer to clean air. There are ways of getting it that get it ubiquitously, instantaneously. So it's different than the others. And since it's different, shouldn't we take advantage of that difference and make it happen in a way that water and electricity couldn't, by definition? You had to do, even in a country as lightened as Costa Rica, that gave up their military in exchange for electricity and wired everybody in 1948-49, it was a very large amount of work, and it's a national project. This could be global and instantaneous and probably closer to the Catholic Church in the sense of spreading an idea. And I don't want to make the comparison too strongly, but it falls in a different class.
It's different, Nicholas, it's different implementation. absolutely between what we are thinking about the connectivity and how it was done on electricity, but not the principle.
Okay. Jeffrey Sachs, on this point, maybe?
Exactly. Actually, we're I think, in an interesting time in which electricity is now regarded as a basic right. And in the SDGs, 7.1 is, by 2030, ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services, which is taken to mean electrification. Water is taken to be a basic human right. By 2030, achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. So the idea of this new global agenda is universal access to basic needs: education, health, water and sanitation, electrification, and in this looser way to the internet, but it's not absolutely as clearly stated, as I said, because in the statement here, it's significantly increase access to information and communications technology and strive to provide universal and affordable access to the internet in least developed countries by 2020. So actually, all of these services are now viewed as universal, but there's a universally to be delivered. There's a slight and important nuance here, which is that the human rights community and human rights law is somewhat distinct from, say, Agenda 2030. So in the human rights law, which operates under a series of conventions and the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, that creates feedbacks and institutional mechanisms and reports. It's hardly decisive because most of these rights are never honored. But the idea is that they create a normative call on the world that these should be honored. They create special rapporteurs to measure. They create a process for accountability, for metrics, and so on. The Sustainable Development Goals are not exactly in the human rights domain, but they have their own body of feedback. They have a high-level political forum. They have every 4 years a global summit at the head of state level. So nothing is translating from saying that something's a right to actually achieving it. The world is much more complicated than that, we know. That's true for the Vatican, too. The reality, you can say something is obligatory and something fulfilled is a big gap. But the idea that normatively this should be a right is not so far-fetched, because we actually are calling these rights now. And we're trying to use that to empower people that don't have them, to say that is my right, and also to educate the world that they are so fundamental that it's hard to live a dignified human life without them. So I'm sympathetic to it, and I would say electricity is in the same category. Water is in the same category. We have a human right to food, and we have a special rapporteur for the right to food. And the series of rapporteurs has done a good job, actually. It hasn't changed the world of hunger, but has done a good job of exposing our failure. And so that's the question of what's the added value of declaring it to be a normative part. But I wouldn't draw such a sharp distinction between electricity and information and water, sanitation, healthcare, and education. At least in the current governance, they're all deemed to be universally required, though how that universality is actually implemented is the drama that we're in.
Okay. We have Pumzile and Marcelo, and then I break for coffee. Please. top bottom.
Thanks. Well, I just want to emphasize the importance of engaging with governments, because I think the whole idea that connectivity is as important as electricity is not a widely spread notion. And to the extent that if you have policymakers supporting and being on the same page, you can facilitate the next steps easier, makes it an important investment to make. I cannot overemphasize that enough, because I talk to them a lot, and I'm quite disturbed that we have not reached that tipping point where this is seen even as a universal right. Secondly, I did not say a lot about some of the dangers of connectivity. Jeff alluded to some critical ones, but in relation to women, for instance, one of the most alarming development is the trafficking of women and the extent to which communities who have no connectivity are at risk of being trafficked and becoming the victims of the technology that they don't even enjoy. So there are some of these critical measures that we need to pay attention to. And working with children at an early age so that we can begin to caution the children about the dark side of the technology from an early age becomes very important, making public education an important platform through which to reach and to engage with young children. And we therefore would need to make sure that we do not leave out the public sector as a critical enabler in this journey. Thanks.
Chancellor.
To reflect on something that say Jeffrey about the connectivity and the power, and I think that we need to reflect also in this morning in a fragment from the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard that say the cook is in charge of the ship. So the ship is in the cook's hands now, and the capital megaphone don't transmit the route anyway, but what will be eating tomorrow. That is to say, if the connectivity is in the hands of the cook, that could be a problem.
Well, this brings us very close to a topic of coffee break. Speaking of cook and sheep, I would guess the connectivity, sheep is constantly giving milk, and but I don't want to elaborate on that. Our fundamental theme of this workshop is the new nuance, the new direction is around the human rights aspect of connectivity. I think we had from all our 4 morning speakers clear statements that they see this as a possibility, that it is, Jeff, I think you were a bit on the cautious side, it may be within reach, I quote you. President Prodi came also clearly out on the side that it's the time to see connectivity as a human right. We saw and heard clear emphasis on the role of connectivity supporting women's rights. So they're springing rights from the connectivity right and vice versa. So thank you all for these excellent presentations and the discussion which we had. We touched upon already some organizational solutions. I'm sure we will come back to those towards the end of the day, and we will hear more during the day. Enjoy your coffee break. Thank you.